By studying the bumps on your head, they can determine whether you are outgoing or shy or simply prone to banging your head wrong.
The statistics on the brain are shocking when you consider no human being knows how to operate her brain or his brain. I predict flatly in 20 years they'll look back at us today and say, they were sweet, primitive, animal-like primates. They did not know how to operate their brains.
I don't know about the operation of my brain, but I know I'm the brains of this operation. Greetings, prisoners of gravity. This is Commander Rick. According to the book Receptors by Dr. Richard Restak, neuroscientists are poised to make great advances in understanding the human mind. So science may yet produce a book of instructions on how to operate the brain. But what about maintenance, minor repairs, and major renovations? Well, the books about how to do all that are here right now in science fiction.
Rising anti-Semitism in Eastern Europe has voted English-only sign 40,000 tons of armed with PCBs blew up the ozone layer today.
Standing by for solid rocket booster separation.
In science fiction, there are two ways to get inside someone's head: magic or machinery, ESP or EKGs. Several novels have involved paranormal police battling the criminal mind, the 1953 novel, The Demolished Man by Alfred Bester, being one of the earliest and best stories about using ESP to corner a killer. More recently, in Greg Bear's novel, Queen of Angels, medicine and machinery help probe the mind of a murderer. Dr. Martin Burke, formerly the foremost expert on the brain until he was discredited by the government for violating people's psychological rights, is hired to probe the mind of a killer named Emmanuel Goldsmith. Burke uses techniques and equipment that allow him to enter what he calls the country of the mind, a sort of virtual representation of his patient's brain. Before Dr. Burke actually gets inside Goldsmith's head, he asks him a slew of questions about his dreams. Do dreams tell us much about the operation of the brain?
Well, for these people they do, because they understand how the human brain works much better than we do. They can, in fact, fix problems that people who are having mental difficulties have. And so they obviously have found guidelines much more effective than Rorschach tests. And what they need to know is what are the subconscious contents of this person? How are they rising up to consciousness? And it's just the beginning. It's like a doctor tapping your knee. It's the mental equivalent of getting a reflex off your knee, just to see if things are working. They're also prodding him to see whether he's there. That's part of their process, is they want to know if there's a fully functioning mentality there.
Right. Why did you use so many geographical terms like landscape and terrain to describe what Martin Burke experiences when he hooks himself up to a patient and enters the country of the mind?
That was the image that occurred to me, that the mind is going to be building up a place before language that is based upon what it sees around it. And so it's going to be creating its own territory. And it's going to be using that territory as a reference point on which to build symbols. When language comes in, you are a distance from that country of the mind. You grow up, you grow away from it. It's still there. It's the ground on which you operate. It's a metaphor, and I don't think it should be taken literally. In other words, I'm not trying to create a theory of psychology that could be developed like Dianetics or anything like that.
Too bad. L. Ron Hubbard made more money from Dianetics than he ever did writing science fiction. Now, in Queen of Angels, when Dr. Burke first goes in country, he sees himself on a vast, empty plain. But at the core of Goldsmith's persona, it's a cityscape. Why did you choose the concrete jungle as the central image of the brain?
Our reactions, my reactions to being in large cities, to seeing all the swarms of thought in the people around, and to think of these in terms of the actions of various portions of my psychology. It just seems very evocative to me. And also, you can make a city very, very scary, and I wanted to do that. The dysfunctional city in the mind that has gone really bad because of early abuse.
In Queen of Angels, an abusive childhood has caused the urban decay in Goldsmith's mindscape. In A Fire Upon the Deep, the character Pham Nguyen suffers brain overload from an experience called God Shatter. In this Hugo Award-winning novel by Werner Vinge, humans have discovered the existence of transcendent beings, the Old Ones. And though the Old Ones live in a strange realm known as the Beyond, they can reach our reality through a chosen conduit. And poor Pham Nguyen has been chosen. How does Pham Nguyen's mind react to God Shatter?
God Shatter was the downloading of as much as would fit, or is alleged to be the downloading of as much as would fit of a superhuman mind. This superhuman mind can use Pham's brain as sort of hardware, but since it wouldn't all fit, there are two strange things that happen. One is not all the components of the superhuman brain are there. In fact, it may be an incompetent amount that's there. And the other is, in order for it to function very much at all, it has to take over everything. So Pham, from his perspective, loses consciousness. And furthermore, it has to work very slowly. It's sort of like if you want to run a home computer program on your old PC, you know, the one that didn't have enough memory and all this stuff, everything goes a lot more slowly. So from Pham's perspective, he loses consciousness and comes back with these great ideas. And actually, this is a model of what I think real inspiration is. I think real inspiration is often based on the fact that creative thought takes a lot of your mental power. In fact, there is no room left for self-awareness, that which is also a very expensive program. So it's chucked out while the real crunching goes on. When the crunching is done and the answer is ready, then it loads back in. I'm being very crude about this, but it loads back in the self-awareness, and the person has this notion that, this idea came, and often they think it came from outside of themselves. It just came while their self-awareness was turned off.
Well, that leads me right into a question I wanted to ask you about the carrying capacity of the human brain. Just how much room do we have available to us?
I remember growing up, you know, every time you opened a speculative book about the mind, it was talking about we only use 10% of the capacity. I am very suspicious of that. I think that as we understand more, we'll see that although it's very plastic and incredibly flexible, that the brain, it's probably easier to make much more intelligent people by adding on rather than trying to figure out how to rewire what is there.
Science fiction has been fascinated by both possibilities. The cyberpunk subgenre has explored the idea of humans plugging their minds into computers to expand their consciousness and multiply memory space. As for stories about rewiring and improving what's there, Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes, which won the Hugo and Nebula Awards, is the heartbreaking tale of a man who takes smart drugs that triple his IQ temporarily. In The Divide by Robert Charles Wilson, hormones make a man so intelligent and so advanced that his personality splits and creates an alter ego, an average guy persona, which can interact and function with ordinary people. And speaking of splitting, in Gem, Frederick Pohl suggests that surgically slicing the human brain through a procedure called a callicectomy might allow people to better develop certain skills. How does having that type of brain surgery end up giving your character, Anna, heightened linguistic abilities?
Well, I'm afraid I've come to believe since then that it wouldn't. The corpus callosum is the bit of matter, sort of like a Polish sausage in the middle of the brain. It unites the two hemispheres. The nerve impulses from one hemisphere pass through the corpus callosum on the way to the other. And at the time, I had some reason to believe that the ability to do translation would be helped if the hemispheres could be kept separate, because one hemisphere could be fluent in one language and the other hemisphere in the other. I'm not sure what gave me that notion, but I've been assured by people who know better than I that it's nonsense. So I withdraw that part of the book. This is something that happens to me quite a lot. I do try to keep the science in my books pretty much up to the state of the art.
Sure.
The state of the art keeps changing. I've since discovered another use for the corpus callosum, though. I'm about to write a novel with a friend of mine who's involved in the Robotics Institute at Carnegie Mellon University, Hans Moravec. And he has proposed that if you want to store a human intelligence in a computer, the way to do it is to cut through the corpus callosum, attach a lot of electronic leads to it, and monitor the messages that go back and forth. And when you've stored a bunch of those in the computer, you've basically stored the personality, intelligence, and memories of the person there. And we have a novel coming up that's based on that.
But there is a catch. Fred told me that in the novel, the cost of recording a computerized copy of a personality is death. Other authors like John Varley and Walter John Williams have explored the idea of people backing up their memories onto computers so they could survive if their biological system crashes. While this kind of electronic immortality is pure science fiction, a huge research effort is underway to develop completely artificial intelligences. And my own AI managed to download some data about the research into artificial intelligence. Nancy, run the section on Soul to Soul. This is a CD-ROM version of the book, The Society of Mind, by AI expert Marvin Minsky.
What would it mean for a machine to be conscious? And the answer is always, I don't know. And so there's a whole set of questions that are directed at the difference between a human and a machine. People say, there's got to be a difference. The machine just does things, the human feels, it thinks, and even it has some magic part called a soul. We can't answer these things in 1 second. The brain has been evolving for 400 million years, and we've been trying to imitate parts of it for 40.
Marvin Minsky recently created a fully functional artificial intelligence by collaborating with science fiction author Harry Harrison on the Turing option. In the novel, Brian Delaney's breakthroughs in AI research are used to help rebuild his own brain after he suffers a gunshot wound to the head, sort of a cyberpunk version of Regarding Henry.
Two important things about Marvin. One, he's a science fiction fan. I've known him for 30 or 40 years, and he's a great enthusiast of science fiction. He believes it opens out the possibility of using intelligence to examine things. Secondly, he's both chemist, a physicist, and mathematician. And he's responsible with a few other people for inventing the theory of artificial intelligence. But the theory was fairly complete, and my job was understanding it, because it is rather complex. And so my job as a science fiction writer is trying to understand science. If I can understand it, I can interpret it. With all these questions you're asking me now, if you asked me 5 years ago, I wouldn't know what you're talking about. This is not my research. This is my understanding of his work. So credit what credit is due. The book is my artifact in every way, the plotting and the construction, the writing thereof. But the theory behind it that promoted it is old Marvin Minsky.
I want to ask you a question that you pose in the book. If the brain is a computer, what is the mind?
If the brain is a computer, mind is the action of the computer. It's a function of the computer. It's called mind, and it grows naturally out of function. It's a very, it's a logical theory, and there's no room in this particular theory for the supernatural. There's no room for a soul. We have no evidence to support any of the religious theories of the construction of the mind at all. I mean, I wish it would. I mean, it'd be nice to have a soul and see it winging away and end up in paradise and little wings and things. I mean, but it's pretty preposterous. So it's better to hold on to what you have now.
Well, researchers like Marvin Minsky are trying to figure out how we might eventually build an AI. But what about the bigger question? Why develop AIs?
What they say about Mount Everest, why did you climb it? Because it was there. We're doing this research. It's utterly fascinating. We're not going to stop. When you open the bottle and the genie comes out, I mean, the research leading to AI right now is leading to all the developments in computer and technology that are changing our life in every way. And incidentally, we're going to develop artificial intelligence because all the bits and pieces are there for it right now. One of these days, someone will say, we'll just put them together. We're going to have AI.
Until and unless the machine duplicates every aspect of the human, we will probably always resist calling it human or intelligent or cognitive, and probably machines never will reproduce every aspect of the human. We're an amazingly complex being, and it's not just the human, by the way. It's not the person. It's the social interaction, the way we interact with the environment, and that's what's complicated. our interactions with other people are much more complex than just our interactions with ourselves. And will we have an artificial intelligence that is also a social creature? A long way away, a long way.
Jack, has the reality of AI research been a disappointment, considering that science fiction has been postulating intelligent machines for so long? I mean, you wrote The Metal Man in 1928.
Up to now, I think it has. However, this research is revealing things about the nature of the human mind and the human brain, and the possibilities are still open.
Well, do you think we're going to have more success in exploring artificial intelligence or in trying to understand how our own brains work?
Well, I think they're going together. I don't think you can usefully separate them at all. I think if you learn more about artificial intelligence, you learn more about our own brains, and vice versa. If you knew more about how our own brains work, you could probably build computers that would parallel the process.
You've written a few stories where artificial intelligences run amok, including With Folded Hands and Jamboree. Is AI as potentially dangerous as your story suggests?
I certainly don't think so. When you're writing a story, you're looking for conflict, and that necessity leads to an exaggeration of the springs of evil in fiction and film and whatever. For the sake of conflict, we tend to exaggerate the dark and neglect the promise, because the goodness is not very dramatic compared to evil.
One author who took the opposite tack and accentuated the benevolent side of AIs was IA, the late great Isaac Asimov. His positronic robots are servants with servos programmed to protect people at all costs. You know, Nancy, you could stand to program some manners into your memory. Nice. Of the dozens of robot novels that Asimov wrote, my favorites involve a human detective and his AI robo-partner solving crimes in an overcrowded future. Asimov also lent his name to a shared world series, Isaac Asimov's Robot City, featuring robo-fiction by a number of SF writers. Jerry, what's the biggest difference between Asimov's robots and where you see real-world robotics headed?
Asimov's robots are much nicer than the robots I expect to be developed. In fact, we have already developed war robots whose main purpose is to go out and kill anything alive until they receive the signal to shut down. This has only been used 2 or 3 times in war games, to my knowledge. But we've already developed war robots, and Asimov, you know, his entire universe is based on robots being kind and gentle and good. I just don't see that happening.
Asimov's robots also think very much like human beings. Will that idea of creating artificial intelligences in our own image prove to be an error from the golden age of SF?
I think that's a limitation that we will get beyond very quickly. And in fact, we're having so much trouble developing artificial human intelligence. We seem to be having a lot more luck developing something along the lines of an artificial cockroach or an artificial dog. I suspect that by the time we get to the complexity of the human mind, it will probably be significantly different from the human mind, to the point where we're just going to go around the human intelligence on our way to something else. I think duplicating a human intelligence is probably, by the time we are able to do it, it will be pointless.
It seems reasonable to assume that we will be most comfortable with artificial intelligence if it does resemble us to a very high degree. I once had a most fascinating discussion with the late Dr. Christopher Evans at the National Physical Laboratory. I went to interview him. And we got on to talking about machine intelligence. He was working on simulation of modes of visual perception by artificial means. And we came to the conclusion that machine intelligence might be as different from ours as wheels are from legs. But that would be all to the good. It would mean that we had an alien species to talk to, which might be highly educational. But I don't think we're going to get to our alien intelligence that way. I think if it starts to tend that way, we'll shy off and go back to trying to imitate ourselves. Which means that the world's going to be duller, but it might also mean the world is safer. I'm not sure.
Amy, in your novel Virtual Girl, why have artificial intelligences been made illegal?
Well, there was a war in Ethiopia, and there was a sort of a Vietnam-style protest against it, and the hackers got involved because the artificial intelligences were pretty much kind of running the war and the targeting systems and things like that, and they infiltrated the AI and corrupted it, and the war kind of fell apart as a result. And the powers that be in Washington got very upset and banned artificial intelligence because it scared them. And it is a very scary concept. It seemed to me very plausible that artificial intelligence could be banned because there's a lot of really deep moral issues around at what point does it become a human or human-like enough to have the same rights. And that's what the whole book is about.
Amy's notion of artificial intelligences being corrupted by humans was brilliantly explored in Home is the Hangman by Roger Zelazny. This Hugo and Nebula Award-winning novelette features an advanced robot named the Hangman, which can be operated remotely by humans. One night, the team who designed the Hangman party down and take turns sneaking it around town until one of them makes a fatal mistake. Then the humans try to cover up what happened, but as they discover, an AI never forgets. How does the Hangman react to becoming a murderer?
Well, ultimately, he forgives the people who used him for exploiting him in the manner in which they did. And I mean, this was an intentional irony that I wanted the artificial intelligence to be more humane than some people are. And even though he was feared as a returning avenging angel sort of thing, he was actually coming back for much more human and emotional reasons than were implied.
Well, why did you decide that a murder would be the spark that this machine needed in order to become fully self-aware?
I wanted to tie in the awakening of the machine intelligence to a level of real self-awareness, to a violent, brutal act, a killing, rather than just some passive contemplative act of it suddenly saying, hey, I'm really alive and aware, and imply that human consciousness may have come into being by being in some way tied in with the evolutionary struggle, that we had to go out and fight and kill things and maybe other people in order to preserve ourselves, and that this is a part of whatever it is that made us what we are, and that it took something very similar to turn this artificial intelligence into a self-aware creature on par, or possibly even greater than people. So, yeah, I used it as a metaphor for what I suppose some people would call the original sin, what other people would just call the survival instinct.
Rob, there have been lots of SF stories about intelligent computers that go bonkers. What did you try to do differently with Jason in Golden Fleece?
The standard model of a computer going bonkers is HAL in 2001, and he goes bonkers because of an unresolvable quandary, which is, in the case of HAL, protecting the mission at all costs and looking after the people who he's in charge of making sure to live through the mission. And when they came into conflict, he ended up going insane and committing murder. It was an unresolvable quandary. I have a friend who says, which is applicable to AI, a friend named Asbed Bedrassian, who says, if man, this fundamental human logic, if one cannot choose between two alternatives, destroy the alternatives, which is something that human beings really don't do, but AIs often do in science fiction. They say, well, I can't choose which is right, so if I just destroy everything, the problem is solved. I no longer have to deal with it. I think by trying to make Jason a moral entity, I think that's why Orson Scott Card said, much to my delight, that Jason was the deepest computer character in all of science fiction. Because Jason was one of the very few computer characters anybody's ever done that has a conscience, that really tries to find the moral balance between conflicting issues.
Well, giving Jason that moral side certainly made him more human, and yet our brains are so tied to our bodies and our biology, which AIs won't have. I mean, our brains are awash in something like 60 different hormones.
Absolutely. I think that people are extraordinarily quick to dismiss how much we are machines of raging hormones. The kind of assumption when we start thinking about artificial intelligence is that human beings are somehow logical in their thought processes, which is why we try to model them on a computer, which is our instrument of logic. But in fact, human beings are notoriously illogical in their thought processes, and their thought processes change through their moods, all of which are influenced by biochemical factors. So yes, when you say, let's look at human beings like in expert systems, let's look at the way one thing makes you think of something else, and it's A leads to B leads to C, you're not modeling human intelligence at all. You're modeling something quite different. But if you start looking at how, well, gee, being really angry makes you go out and write the best thing you can to show them all that they were wrong and you were right, then you're on your way to modeling what humanity is all about. And that's what real artificial intelligence is yet to touch on, modeling the play of emotions and hormones that really affect what it is that we've got between our ears.
And yet, if we make AIs like you and I, how will they regard humans? With as much contempt as we seem to regard each other? 20 years before the Terminator warned, "I'll be back," D.F. Jones wrote Colossus about defense computers linking up to form a super consciousness that enslaves humanity. In Great Sky River, author Greg Benford prophesizes an all-out war between men and machines. But assuming we can coexist, well then, as multimedia expert Howard Rheingold told me, automation could spell obsolescence.
If you can create machines and computers that can do what humans used to do, even perceiving and thinking tasks, then the task becomes, well, what should humans be doing? If we don't have to use our muscles to go out and move matter, and we don't have to use our brains to crunch numbers, what is it that humans are really about? Otherwise, we face the danger of becoming adjuncts to the machines. We want the machines to be our servants, but increasingly, I think everyone can think of instances where human lives are fit into the schedules of machines. What happens when we can create realities, when we can communicate with each other across all kinds of boundaries, when we can simulate human thinking processes? How are human beings going to be treated in that world? What are human beings good for? Those questions that used to be philosophical now become very practical.
Could help to preserve Earth's fragile ecology. On the other hand, it could kill every living creature on the planet. Still, time will tell. I'm Enrico Gruen. Good night. On Second Nature.